Good morning, brethren, and welcome to our bi-weekly program entitled A Glance at the Word, which is broadcast live every Monday and every Wednesday at 8 a.m. West Africa time, which is 7 a.m. GMT. Today is Wednesday, the 27th of July, 2022, and our topic is entitled Self-Sentenced Death Penalty. It is, in fact, the continuation and conclusion of the topic that we started on the 4th of July. And today is part 8 of the teaching, and it is titled The Covenant with Death. The Covenant with Death. So today's topic is fully entitled Self-Sentenced Death Penalty, Part 8, The Covenant with Death. Let's start our teaching by reading Isaiah chapter 28. Isaiah chapter 28, verses 15 and 18. Isaiah chapter 28, verses 15 and 18. Let's read. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we are in agreement. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and on the falsehood we have hidden ourselves. Verse 18, your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the overflowing scourge passes through, then you will be trampled down by it. Let's read the passage again. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we are in agreement. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and on the falsehood we have hidden ourselves. Your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the overflowing scourge passes through, then you will be trampled down by it. You see, there are many people who are afraid of death and who are also afraid of all that pertains to death. In fact, normally, no one likes death. I don't, and I know that you don't either. No one likes death, yet not everyone fears death. Those who fear death at times tend to make a covenant with death and also an agreement with the abode of the dead. Now, the abode of the dead has many different names. It is indifferently called Sheol, as we read in the passage, or Hades, as it is written elsewhere in the Bible, or the abode of the dead, as it is also being called in the Bible. And the abode of the dead is directly linked to death, of course. Thus, whatever pertains to death also pertains to the abode of the dead. So whatever links you to death also links you to the abode of the dead. And all those people who are afraid of death or those people who fear death are also knowingly or unknowingly afraid of the abode of the dead. They are knowingly or unknowingly fearing death, the abode of the dead as well. The fear of death makes people have funny behaviors. So people who fear death tend to make decisions that are somehow illogical because of those funny behaviors we talked about. Making a decision, an illogical decision concerning death, is a funny behavior. And those who fear death think that they can make a covenant with death for death to spare their lives. This is what is funny and illogical. They think that they can make any arrangement with death to spare their lives. And they think that death is going to keep that arrangement, that death is going to respect that covenant. You know, death is our enemy. And I can even say death is our enemy for life. So death is our enemy forever. And this can never change. Death cannot become your friend. Death is always and will always remain your enemy. So you cannot befriend your enemy, you know. You cannot. Your enemy will never become your friend. If you make a covenant with your enemy, expect to be deceived by your enemy sooner or later, because your enemy is your enemy. Your enemy is bound to do what his nature is always telling him to do. And the nature of your enemy is not the nature of your friend. And the nature of an enemy is different from the nature of a friend. The nature of a friend is to love and to help, while the nature of an enemy is to hate and to destroy. You cannot ask your enemy to turn his hatred into love. That's not possible. It is not your enemy's nature to love you. His nature is to hate you. So if he were to love you, he wouldn't be your enemy anymore. Yet he is your enemy. Thus, he can only but hate you, not love you. Now, there are many ways that people make covenants with death. But let me tell you this, no matter the way chosen, people who make covenants with death are led by fear of death in the greatest majority. Fear of dying of hunger, fear of dying of sickness, fear of dying of poverty, fear of death. And the fear of death makes them think that if they make a covenant with death, death will keep that covenant. They think that if they make an agreement with the abode of the abode of the dead is not going to swallow them up. Thus, when they finally are aware that death and the abode of the dead don't keep their covenants, it is much too late. It generally is much too late. Let's now read Proverbs chapter 30. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 15 and 16. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 15 and 16. The leech has two daughters, gave and gave. There are three things that are never satisfied, four never say enough: the grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire never says enough. So what interests us here is to know that the grave is never satisfied and the grave never says enough. You see, death is what leads to the grave, and the grave is the gate to the abode of the dead. You see how they are linked. Death leads to the grave, and the grave is the gate to the abode of the dead. So when the Bible is saying the grave here, it means death. And it also means the abode of the dead. So because if the grave is never satisfied, this means that death and the abode of the dead as well are never satisfied. The grave never says enough. Death and the abode of the dead too never say enough. Thus, no covenant with death will ever prevent its author from dying, and no agreement with the abode of the dead will ever prevent its author to go there. It is illusory and foolish to think that death will keep or will respect its covenant with you, or that the abode of the dead will not open its mouth and swallow you up because you have made an agreement with it. The nature and role of death is to kill, not to spare life. Death kills and sends its victims into the abode of the dead. You know, everything plays its role according to its nature. Death plays its role according to its nature. The abode of the dead plays its role according to its nature. The nature of death is to kill, not to spare life. The nature of the abode of the dead is to open its big mouth and swallow people who are dead, not spare the lives of any people. But now then, as we said earlier, there are many different ways to make a covenant with death, or to make an agreement with the abode of the dead. We're going just to see a few of them, because no matter the way used, a covenant of death remains a covenant with death remains a covenant with death, and it leads to premature death, because a covenant with death is a self-sentenced death penalty. Let's read Ezekiel chapter 13, verses 18 and 19. Ezekiel chapter 13, verses 18 and 19. Let's find it. Ezekiel chapter 13, verses 18 and 19. And say, thus says the Lord God, woe to the women who sew magic charms on their sleeves, and make veils for the heads of people of every height to haunt souls. Will you haunt the souls of my people and keep yourselves alive? And will you profane me among my people for handfuls of barley and for pieces of bread, killing people who should not die, and keeping people alive who should not live, by your lying to my people who listen to lies? See, in fact, there are many categories of people who make or who have made covenants with death and with the abode of the dead. And among those categories, we first have sorcerers and the like. The passage we read is talking of sorcerers. So sorcerers and the like have made a covenant with death, and they spend much time trading life and death. Sorcerers kill people in exchange for their own lives, or in exchange for the lives of people who pay them for it. They are so confident in their covenant with death and with the abode of the dead that they are convinced that the more people they kill, that is, the more people they give to the abode of the dead, the longer they will live, or the longer the people who pay them will live. But that's a lie. Death and the abode of the dead have no friend, and they are very far from being faithful to any agreement or to any covenant. Death and the abode of the dead are only faithful to their nature, which makes them killers. Now, apart from sorcerers, another category of people who make or who have made covenant with death and with the abode of the dead is that of the people who go after sorcerers and soothsayers. Any covenant that you make with somebody who has a covenant with death is also a covenant with death. Still another category of people who have a covenant with death and an agreement with the abode of the dead is that of the people who are skilled in occult arts. So members of the different cults that we know are in this category. These may be Freemasons, Rosicrucians, New Agers, and many others. All those who practice magic or the like are also among those who have made a covenant with death and an agreement with the abode of the dead. Any covenant of any kind with death is a self-sentenced death penalty. And any agreement with the abode of the dead is also a self-sentenced death penalty. So, my brethren, do all never to make any covenant with death and with the abode of the dead. For if you make any covenant or any agreement with death or with the abode of the dead, that would be a self-sentenced death penalty. You are attracting premature death on yourself. Dear brethren, commit yourself fully to God and never to death or to the abode of the dead. God bless you abundantly beyond all your expectations, and have a very wonderful continuation of the week.